Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Let's talk about cryptos today. And when we talk about cryptos, we're going to talk with a particular perspective. A perspective of whether governments are thinking right when they are worried because of crypto. Recently, the Governor of Reserve Bank of India made a statement that cryptocurrencies have no underlying, not even a tulip. What was he referring to? Quite often I come across people who are trying to dig deeper into this tug of war between perspectives on crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. They're trying their best to understand why the government is worried, and they want to have an opinion on what should happen to this rising world of cryptocurrencies. They've asked me a number of times on what's your opinion on this, Vibhu, and I've always believed that there is no binary or straightforward answer. This happens to be a complex area, and I realized that the best way to answer this question is to look into the story of tulips. Yes, exactly the same tulips which the governor of RBI was making a reference to a few days back. This video is divided into three parts. In the first part, we'll go back to the glorious era of 1600s in Holland and walk through every step of the story of Tulip Mania. In the second section, we'll take a look at how this Tulip Mania is similar to the current mania of cryptos, the current buzz of cryptos, and how is it different? There are many articles, many perspectives which are publicly available on why these two are similar. But I haven't found much of information on how these two are different, or putting it in a different way, how the current crypto buzz could be arguably a relatively less innocuous form of a bubble and more harmful than all the other bubbles that we have had in the past. And finally, in the last section, we are going to take a look at a very subtle aspect, a very subtle nuance that applies to the Tulip Mania and could very well be applicable to our current crypto scheme of things. Now, before I proceed, I would like to mention that there is no investment advice being given in this video. Also, I'm not taking sides on whether crypto is good or bad. What we are discussing in this video is whether governments are correct in getting worried about the rising popularity of the crypto world. If they are correct, is there a foundation to that? And if there is a foundation, what exactly is it? So let's start with what was the Tulip Mania or the Tulip Bubble. Now, before I start narrating the story to you, I have a request for you. Now, it's going to be fun if you can imagine yourself in the glorious Dutch era of 1600s when this Tulip Mania was in making. That will help you understand the pros and cons of what we're going to discuss further in the next couple of sections. And trust me, it's going to be a lot of fun. So what I'm requesting you is to live the story of 1600s of Holland. The 1600s were the golden era of the Dutch, thanks to the business done by the Dutch East India Company. This brought an era of unprecedented boom and opulence to the Dutch economy, and along with this unprecedented boom came two things. Two things happened almost simultaneously. One, people started looking for new status symbols to symbolize their wealth and opulence, the richness, superiority. And the Dutch set up the world's first stock market or stock exchange. Now, if you're thinking how these two things are connected, give me a minute. I've promised you that this story will be a simple one, would be easy for you to grasp, and that will be the case. So tulips became the new status symbol of wealth and opulence. And given the scale of economic prosperity in Holland, being much more than the supply of tulips in the same country, tulip became a very scarce and a special commodity. The tulip prices soared and soared and soared. Now what happened was, people were very keen to buy and own tulips to flaunt their richness. But there was one peculiarity about this flower. The tulips blossomed only for 3 months in the year out of 12. And these months primarily were March, April and May. What would people do in the remaining 9 months? People could not put to rest their aspiration or their ambition to get their hands onto the tulip flower. And hence, in the remaining 9 months, what they did was that they promised to buy or sell tulips. I'll explain. So imagine we are in December, and I am very keen to possess a tulip flower, but the tulip is going to blossom only in the month of March. So what do I do now? How do I ensure that come March, and I will have that one tulip which I want? So what I do is that I pick a piece of paper, I write that I promise to buy one tulip for 1,000 guilders in the month of March when the flower blossoms. Yeah, I convert this document into a contract, and I go to the market and say that, hey, this is a document where I'm promising, I've put my signatures here, to buy a tulip in the month of March when the flower blossoms. Is there anyone who is growing tulips or who will have a possession of tulip in the month of March and is willing to sell that to me and promise right here in the month of December? Once the other party was found, the two parties could sign on the document and the deal was done. Now, this contract was called a forward contract. Okay. So until now, we have seen the first two stages of the tulip mania or the tulip bubble. One, people suddenly found and realized that they can flaunt their superiority, richness, and opulence in form of tulips, and they were ready to pay a good amount of price for that. And two, even when the tulips were not readily available in the market, when they were not blossoming, in the remaining 9 months of the year, people were so keen to get their hands on the flowers that they promised to buy and sell. Now it didn't stop here. In the third stage, what happens? Imagine now I am that person who has promised to buy the flower for 1,000 guilders in the month of March. But there are only limited number of tulips in the market, say only 1,000 tulips, which are going to blossom in the month of March. No more remain. Yeah, you also need that tulip. I also need that tulip. The only difference is that I have signed that contract and I have booked that tulip for myself. So you come to me that, hey Vibhu, you know something? I'll pay you additional money. Can you just give that contract to me so that instead of you, I can buy the tulip from the same seller? And in return, Vibhu, I'm going to give you 200 extra guilders for that. And I say, fine, go ahead. So effectively, what I've done is that I've sold the contract to you, and the effective cost at your end of the same tulip is not 1,000 guilders. It's now 1,000 plus 200, 1,200 guilders. Yeah, understand? Okay. The fourth stage of this is where people realized that the rest of the world is always keen to get their hands on tulips via such forward contracts. And so people stopped thinking about tulips or possessing tulips. People were more keen to buy and sell these forward contracts to make money in between. Like in our example, I've made 200 guilders extra. Similarly, if you find another person who is keen to take the same tulip instead of you, he or she may be willing to pay you 1,500 guilders for that. Like this, the price via the forward markets, yeah, it soared even further to an unimaginable level. Now, this tulip mania reached a height where people realized that a promise to buy a tulip could be sold at any price, a price as high as the price of a mansion in Amsterdam. And I would like to quote something very interesting here. In 1634, tulip mania swept through Holland. The Library of Economics and Liberty writes that the rage among Dutch to possess tulip bulbs was so great that the ordinary industry of the country was neglected, and the population, even to its lowest dregs, embarked in the tulip trade. If you haven't noticed, what they're trying to say is that everybody in the society, everybody in the economy just knew one way of making quick money. Buy tulip forward contracts, sell it. Grow tulips and sell it. Because that was a shortcut to becoming rich, without productively adding much of economic value to the nation and to the world. Finally, one day people realized that they're paying way too much for a tulip. Suddenly markets were dry. Sellers were there to sell the forward contracts, but there were no buyers. To entice buyers, sellers reduced the price. The spiral went on and on and on and on until tulip prices plummeted drastically, making it clearly evident that this was indeed a bubble which had burst now. Now let's enter the second section. Here we are talking about how the current setting of the crypto world, the cryptocurrencies, is similar to the tulip bubble, if it is, and how is it different from the tulip bubble, if it is. Recall that I had asked you to imagine that you're living the tulip mania right now. So now what it translates into is that in 2022, you're here. You now have some flower where the value of every flower is equivalent to the value of a mansion or a villa. Yeah. And not just this, on a daily or a weekly basis, the value of this flower is fluctuating. Does it sound any familiar? I know you're going to say that yes, it's sounding familiar. That sounds similar to fluctuations of value of a stock or a real estate property or any other security or commodity. And you're also likely to say that, look, we have seen financial crises based on such scenarios before. We have had the 2007-8 crisis. We have had the crisis of 1929. We have had the dot-com bubble and many other local country level real estate bubbles here and there. And you're also likely to say that, Vibhu, probably you're saying that something similar is going to happen for cryptocurrencies. And I say, fine, that's correct. Then how is it different? How is the current scheme of things different from the Tulip Mania or any other bubble of the past? Most of the other bubbles of the past. This is where here it gets interesting. With cryptocurrencies, what's different is that the bubbled commodity, that's the cryptocurrency itself, is also a currency, is also a means to store value and a means of exchanging value during payments and transactions. That wasn't the case in most of the bubbles. I'll explain. Imagine we are having a Tulip Mania right now, and you have a flower whose value is in millions, and the same flowers now are also being used to purchase every single thing that you would buy using a rupee, a dollar, a euro, or a pound, or a Swiss franc, depending on the country you stay in. This means that if you were to go to the market and buy a loaf of bread and a few kilos of vegetables, you would actually pay a part of the petal of a flower to the merchant instead of paying the currency. If you're relating this to the Tulip Mania, I hope you can see the difference. This has never been the case in Tulip Mania that tulips were used as a currency. It wasn't the case in the crisis of 2007 and 8 that part of your real estate property was being used to buy vegetables or used to buy groceries or anything, that a notebook, a laptop, or anything. But that's happening right now. So there is a difference. Now I know many of you would say that, Vibhu, what's your problem? If the buyer and the seller are okay to transact using flower petals even if they have to, what's your problem? I'll tell you what's the issue here, and there are two. And these are not my issues. This is my opinion on why a government is worried. One, the value of the flower is not stable. It's rising and falling on a daily or a weekly basis. So today, if you have to buy a loaf of bread, you give one petal. Tomorrow you're giving a quarter of a petal. A few weeks down the time, you're going to give 5 or 6 petals. After a month, you're going to give just 1% or 2% of a petal. Don't you think it's going to be quite unstable for the entire economy to keep repricing all the commodities, all the products and services in the market? That's one, and that's a big risk. Yeah. Second, and this is very interesting, this is a little more intricate than the previous one. Imagine that flowers are being accepted as a currency in the country we stay in. Don't you think that in this scenario, you and I would be keen to get rich by having access to the seeds of these flowers? Don't you think all of us are just starting to think, getting started to think that, the shortest way to get rich is to get access to the seeds of the flower, or to literally grow money in our own gardens? And do you think that's the right way? Do you think that the dynamics of money supply in a country would become a function of the dynamics of the flower market and the seed market? And do you think it is fair for a country to derive the supply of money from a commodity market? You could have your opinion. I'm just posting the right questions for you to think, and that's my hypothesis on why a government is worried because of this. And finally, don't you think that it would be close to impossible to have any control on how much money should and would circulate in the economy when you look at it from a government standpoint or a central bank standpoint? Now, you may argue that anyhow, anyway, we don't want the government to control it because we feel the government is not good at controlling it, and that's your opinion, that's fine. But even if that happens to be your opinion, do you think this is the solution? Do you think if any one of us gets control on the supply and the supply of money in the economy, we would be doing justice for the greater good to the nation? Or are we likely to become selfish and serve our own interests? What are we likely to do? Think about it. Yeah. We are now into the last section, and I've titled this section as the final twist: how an anomaly can be advertised as a virtue. And to understand this, let's go back to 1600s again. Let's look into the Tulip Mania. In that era, in that story of Tulip Mania, Tulip Bubble, there was a special flower that was called Viceroy Tulip. It had a very distinct and special color combination, which gave it a very different appearance, a very special appearance. It had a striped multicolored pattern rather than a single solid color, and that's why this particular breed of tulip was trading at a special price when compared with the rest of the tulips. However, it turned out later that this virtue was actually an anomaly. Why? The multicolored pattern happened to be evolving from a virus strain, and hence the inference was the beauty that was being valued was actually a function of a viral disease. So imagine you're living in the era of Tulip Mania. You keep valuing an exotic, beautiful flower for quite some time, and suddenly you wake up to the reality that all that beauty was actually due to a virus. That was a shock to you, right? Now, tying this back to a crypto world, what I'm trying to convey is that at times it's humanly impossible, or at least unrealistic, for an average buyer or a seller to understand every single nuance of the commodity. I think it's fair to state in the current world that as average buyers and sellers of crypto commodities, we may not have the view at the last level as to if an advertised feature of a crypto commodity or a crypto coin is really a virtue. For example, how many of us do you think understand the exact working of everything related to our favorite crypto coin or token? Let's face it, we don't. Now, we may definitely believe that our favorite cryptos are truly revolutionary, and we may have our own reasons to it, but when it comes to the minute details of it, we will have to depend on what we are told by the experts, what we are told by the issuers of that crypto coin or token. So just like we trust a doctor to be knowing more than ourselves, our bodies more than we do, yeah, and just like we trust the financial intermediaries that they'll be able to distribute our money properly to the borrowers, we will have to trust the experts, the crypto experts, and the crypto issuers in this case as well. I personally don't think that the crypto world is making everything transparent. Things which were not transparent in the existing financial world, they will continue, or if not the same things, then some other aspects of issuance of assets, tokens, coins, currencies will continue to remain obscured and obfuscated even in the new crypto world. Just like we have had instances of our trust getting broken, our trust on the banking system getting broken, inviting a financial crisis, then we may have instances of a trust on crypto issuers getting broken and inviting some other form of financial crisis. I'll refrain from taking specific examples in the interest of time, but I do encourage you to find instances where blockchains have been compromised. It is very much realistically possible. And I'm not being pessimistic here, I'm just being realistic here. Yeah. So I hope, wrapping it all up, I hope I've been able to do a few things in this video. Number one, I hope I've been able to give you an idea of how a financial crisis is made by virtue of human behavior and how it unfolds. We have studied an example of one of the world's first or earliest, at least the earliest, one of the earliest examples of a financial crisis, the example of Dutch Tulip Mania. Second, I hope I've been able to convey to you that how the current crypto scheme of things is fundamentally different from most of the usual financial crises we have had in the past. And finally, last but not the least, I hope I have been able to give you a neutral perspective on why governments and regulators are genuinely and rightly worried in the interest of public. I know many of you can be and would be crypto enthusiasts, and you're right. I too am a crypto enthusiast, but in this video, our purpose was just to look at where are the regulators coming from. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks for watching the video.